Putin rejects any deal. Then Ukraine's revenge hits the Kremlin's command network. That headline became reality at 3:15 a.m. when a blast powerful enough to spike temperatures above 1,100 degrees Celsius tore through the Shatura power station, sending a column of fire roaring over 60 meters into the night sky. Moments earlier, while Moscow slept under a sheet of winter frost, the heart of its command grid was already unraveling. The 1,500 megawatt artery feeding secure bunkers and military relays across the capital began to flicker, pushing 33,000 homes toward blackout as voltage wavered dangerously. Hours before that explosion, Putin dismissed peace talks with a smirk on live television. But while those words echoed across state media, 30 Ukrainian drones were slicing through the night air, flying a marathon route at only 100 to 120 feet above frozen treetops, preparing the most precise retaliation of the war. If you saw that first fireball, what would you have thought was coming next? 3:15 a.m., November 27, 2025. The night above Shatura looked calm, glass still, silent, undisturbed. But beneath that calm, the lifeline of Moscow's command network was already dying. The 1,500 megawatt artery that powered strategic bunkers across the capital had begun to collapse, its surface temperature spiking past 1,180 degrees Celsius as steel frames warped and glowed. Within seconds, lights inside 33,000 households flickered like candle flames trapped in a storm. Hours earlier, while cameras rolled and the world watched, Vladimir Putin dismissed peace proposals with a smirk. 15 minutes after that broadcast, 295 Russian bombers launched missiles toward Kiev's sleeping districts. The message was clear: winter would be used as a weapon. He intended to freeze a nation into silence. What he didn't know was that a counter-message had already been launched. Rewind 28 minutes. 2:47 a.m., 75 miles outside Moscow. A dark ribbon of motion slid above the frost-covered tree line. 30 Ukrainian AN-196 drones, flying a marathon route that pushed the edges of both battery life and aerodynamics. They had traveled over 210 miles, hugging terrain barely 100 to 120 feet above the ground. Too low for long-range radar, too high to be swallowed by the forest canopy. For 6 hours, they moved like shadows. No flares, no signatures, just cold precision. Their GPS drift had grown to less than 0.6 meters, an impossible accuracy for machines fighting both crosswinds and sub-zero turbulence. But now the marathon was ending. Ahead of them, glowing on encrypted screens inside a Kiev bunker, were 3 step-up transformers, each one a 10-ton core filled with 40,000 liters of volatile dielectric oil. Destroying one would be an inconvenience. Destroying all 3 would force the Kremlin's command grid into a blackout, deeper and longer than any missile strike. The drones lowered their noses. Distance to target, 5 miles. Countdown, 94 seconds. And in that frozen corridor, the real operation finally began. At 3:11 a.m., the valley south of Shatura tightened into a funnel of shadows. The Ukrainian drones slipped into it one by one, dropping to 22 feet, lower than the roof of a countryside garage. Their propellers buzzed at 54 decibels, quieter than a household fan. But the consequences of their silence would soon shake a capital of 12 million people. Ahead of them, the densest defensive wall on the planet was waking up. The tactical map inside Russia's regional command center lit with concentric rings of threat. 19 Pantsir batteries, 11 Tor M2 launchers, and 2 S-400 regiments. A combined architecture worth nearly $1.2 billion. For years, Russian officers had boasted this region was untouchable. But defenses built to shoot downward could not aim low enough when the threat crawled in from below. The next 90 seconds would expose that flaw in brutal clarity. Inside the S-400 cabin 10 miles north, the graveyard shift jolted upright as their 92 N6E radar painted 10 bright vectors, piercing upward through the cold air. To them, it looked like a coordinated assault, impossible to ignore. They fired, without hesitation. 4 48N6 missiles, accelerating past Mach 6, tore through the sky, obliterating what they believed was the strike force. But you, watching this, What would you have thought if you saw those fireballs? Would you have assumed the attack was over? Those drones were never meant to survive. Their entire purpose was to make Russia burn through its best interceptors in under 70 seconds. And now that the long-range defenses were empty, the real danger was unfolding below the tree line. The question is, will Russia realize it before the next wave arrives? Stay with me, because Chapter 3 escalates everything. The last fragments of the decoy drones were still drifting to the snow when the rhythm of the battlefield changed. For a brief moment, just 41 seconds, the valley seemed to freeze in place. No radar alarms, no missile trails, just the hum of cooling circuits inside the S-400 cabin and the faint hiss of steam rising from spent launch tubes. But that silence was the most dangerous sound of the night. 3:12 a.m., a ripple formed on the medium-range radar. First 1 dot, then 10. Each contact low, fast, and closing at 310 miles per hour. These drones were not climbing into the kill zone. They were sliding beneath it, hugging the contours of the valley floor with less than 0.4 degrees of altitude deviation. A flight profile usually reserved for piloted strike aircraft, not unmanned machines costing a fraction of a cruise missile. The S-400 teams could do nothing. Their long-range arrays were blind at that altitude, unable to track objects concealed by terrain masking. Control shifted instantly to the short-range units. Deep in the birch forest, 3 Tor M2 vehicles activated simultaneously. Their phased array radar spun up with a sharp electronic whine, locking onto all 10 targets in under 0.9 seconds. Cold launch tubes fired in perfect sequence, 10-meter ejections followed by ignited thrusters snapping horizontally toward the intruders. 7 drones were neutralized before they completed their next waypoint. Fragmentation bursts sliced through composite wings, sending debris falling like dark snowflakes. Yet 3 remained. A momentary interference pattern, possibly from the transformer yard's own electromagnetic field, masked their signatures just long enough for them to cross the Tor's minimum range. They slipped directly into the domain of the Pantsir crews, positioned along the ridgeline. Operators switched to optical mode. Twin 30mm autocannons roared, sending 5,200 rounds per minute into the darkness. The first drone vanished in a streak of sparks. The second spiraled down after a burst severed its stabilizer. But the third did something unexpected. Instead of climbing or banking, it dropped, falling to 19 feet, skimming the valley like a thrown stone. The Pantsir's guns could no longer depress to match its angle. For the first time that night, a Russian operator felt the cold understanding that the engagement geometry no longer belonged to him. And in the command vehicle above the ridge, a new alarm lit the screen. Wave 3 had just awakened. 3:13 a.m. The valley brightened with the last muzzle flashes from the Pantsir batteries when a different motion unfolded above the tree line. From the southern corridor, the final 10 Ukrainian strikers rose sharply, climbing from 20 feet to 780 feet in just 2.8 seconds. The maneuver was abrupt enough to overload their own gyroscopes, yet every airframe held formation with mathematical precision. But they weren't attacking. At the apex of the climb, each drone opened its payload bay. Instead of warheads, 2 compact FPV units dropped into the air, 20 total, each weighing only a few kilograms but fitted with power systems capable of reaching 140 kilometers per hour in under a second. They ignited mid-fall, scattering into erratic, impossible flight paths. The Russian radar network reacted poorly. Systems designed to track jets and cruise missiles suddenly faced a swarm built to defy prediction. Tracking reticles jittered across screens. Algorithms designed around linear motion overloaded as the FPVs shifted trajectory every 0.12 seconds, pulling microturns that conventional interceptors couldn't compute. Pantsir crews responded with volume. 6 twin-barrel autocannons opened fire, painting the night with high explosive tracers. Streams of ignition lines carved across the sky. But the FPVs moved like a cloud of sparks blown sideways by the wind. One executed a tight corkscrew around a tracer line. Another slipped through a gap no wider than its rotor span. Russian gunners tried to prioritize targets, but each optical tracker could only follow one drone at a time. For every FPV eliminated, 2 more slipped into blind angles created by terrain shadows and gun depression limits. Amid the chaos, 4 of the larger Ukrainian mothership drones were destroyed, engulfed by fire, or shredded by shrapnel. But the damage was already done. The defense grid, for the first time in the engagement, had lost its coherence. Below the swirling debris, 6 remaining strike drones plunged back toward the valley floor, engines throttling down as they prepared for the phase that would decide everything. 3:14 a.m. While the air above the valley churned with tracer fire and falling debris, the 6 surviving Ukrainian strike drones executed their final descent. Their altitude dropped from 780 feet to 21 feet in less than 1.6 seconds, engines throttling back to near idle to blend into the thermal background of the snow-covered ground. Their GPS correction error fell below 0.4 meters, an accuracy normally reserved for guided munitions, not lightweight unmanned craft. On the ridgeline, a Panzer operator caught a glimpse of a blurred silhouette racing across the snowfield at 305 kilometers per hour. Instinct took over. He forced the turret downward, but the autocannons froze at their mechanical limit of -5 degrees. The drones were flying at -10 relative to his elevation. He could see them, he could track them, but he could not touch them. The firing arc simply did not reach that low. The tactical picture fractured. Tor crews were still reloading. Panzer gunners tried to switch to missile mode, but their targeting radars struggled to lock onto objects traveling below the tree canopy, with a radar cross-section smaller than 0.08 square meters. By the time the trackers stabilized, the drones had already crossed into the protected perimeter of the transformer yard. Ahead of them, the industrial complex emerged from the darkness like a metallic fortress. 3 step-up transformers, towering structures weighing over 10 tons each, glowed white-hot in thermal imagery. Their dielectric oil had reached internal temperatures above 170 degrees Celsius as load demand spiked across Moscow's overextended grid. For hours, the swarm had died layer by layer to carve this opening. Every destroyed drone, every intercepted decoy, had pushed Russia's defenses into the exact posture Ukraine needed. Now, after 11 minutes of relentless diversion, saturation, and misdirection, the final 6 strike drones lined up with surgical precision. The corridor was open. The last phase of the operation was about to begin. 3:15 a.m., the 6 Ukrainian strike drones emerged from the shadowed corridor and accelerated toward the transformer yard. At 180 meters from the first target, their thermal seekers locked instantly. In the DS Max interface, the 3 transformers appeared as blinding white monoliths, each one storing enough energy to power a mid-sized city. The lead drone struck first. Its 28-kilogram shaped charge activated on impact, compressing a jet of superheated copper that pierced the steel housing at nearly 7,000 meters per second. Inside, 40,000 liters of dielectric oil met open air. The chemical reaction ignited in a boiling liquid vapor burst that expanded with the force of a 10-story furnace tearing open at once. A column of fire rolled upward, painting the night sky with a plume visible from 27 miles away. Automatic breakers tried to reroute the surge toward Unit Beta. They never had the chance. Drone 2 hit the second transformer just as coolant valves attempted to stabilize the overload. The detonation shredded control wiring across a 32-meter radius and forced the remaining oil reservoir into flash ignition. The second tower folded, collapsing into a pool of incandescent debris. The grid was now operating at 1/3 capacity, yet demand across Moscow exceeded 500 megawatts. Frequency monitors plunged from 49.7 Hz to 44.3 in under 9 seconds. Emergency generators failed to synchronize. Drone 3 was damaged earlier by a graze from a 30mm tracer and plowed into the concrete apron, but the remaining trio continued through the smoke. They struck Unit Gamma in a synchronized attack. 3 charges, 3 impacts, 1 conclusion. The final explosion shook sensors across the region. Windows fractured over 900 feet away. Control boards inside the station went dark as voltage collapsed. Within seconds, the Kremlin's command grid fragmented. Streetlights along the MKD ring died in a cascading blackout. The capital slipped into winter darkness, and the fire rising over Shatura marked the moment the entire front shifted. When the final transformer collapsed, the Shatura Valley stopped being a battlefield and turned into a beacon of flame seen from satellites drifting hundreds of miles overhead. What had begun as a silent approach through frozen forests ended with the Kremlin's command grid fractured, railway lines immobilized, and more than 30,000 residents left without heat in the dead of winter. Ukraine hadn't matched Russia missile for missile. They had forced a system worth tens of millions to waste itself shooting at shadows, clearing a path for a strike package that cost less than a suburban home. And as Moscow plunged into a rolling blackout, one truth became impossible to ignore. Modern warfare isn't only about power, it's about precision, timing, and the ability to turn an enemy's strength into a weakness. If you were watching this unfold, what would you say was the real turning point of the night? Let me know your thoughts below.